Welcome, everyone. I hope everyone is in good health and really looking forward to our discussion today. I am Dimitris Mavrakis, a research director here at ABI Research, and I would like to welcome everyone to our panel discussion on AI and how AI is revolutionizing the telecoms market. Now, a few housekeeping rules before we start. Zoom has a Q&A function, so please use that if you want to ask a question to any of our panelists. And also the recording will be live in a few days, and our colleagues from ABI Research will send out an email with the recording. So I'd like to introduce a topic for a few minutes, and many of us are familiar with AI, how it's being used in the telecoms domain. And if many of you have traveled to MWC the past 2 years, I think you'll remember that AI was a very hot topic, and many vendors and operators were discussing how AI will revolutionize their operations and their business. And many developments have happened since then, both in the hyperscale domain and in the telecoms domain. But the role of AI in terms of functionality, deployment, commercial activities is in no way set in stone for the telecoms domain. A lot still needs to take place before AI truly enables automation and zero-touch operations as it promises. And perhaps a key topic that needs further discussion and development, of course, is how it will close the loop. So in other words, how AI will enable a truly autonomous operation for the network. The question is, are operators ready for this? So I remember myself asking this discussion in a conference 4 years ago, and the answer was a definite no back then. So operators were not ready to let machines run their network. But as we said earlier, a lot has happened until then. So the question remains today. And in order to answer this question and many others, we have a great set of panelists. We have Todd Spraggins from Oracle. We have Rajesh Gadiyar from Intel. We have Marco Di Giacomo from Verizon and Cengiz Uchbenli from Vodafone, who will help us discuss these topics. Now, to start our panel discussion, I would like to ask each individual panelist to present your line of work in your company, and as well, what use cases you're studying for AI in your own line of work. Perhaps starting with Todd, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I enjoyed being on this panel. So again, I'm Todd Spraggins from Oracle. I'm in the communications business unit where I'm a strategy director and look at our entire product portfolio, specifically around how telecom is being impacted by cloud and AI technologies. So from the use case perspective, I think the things that interest us, besides obviously being a company that is known for database and data and machine learning and data science tools, we actually do have vertical focus. And from the telecoms market, we're looking at things like how the NWDAF is going to evolve into the ability to provide not only the network automation that Dimitris was talking about, but potentially to also plug into things higher up, such as into the CX world, so that you can do things like have understanding of a dynamic experience score to help the customer support staff, to do things like enable IoT use cases around things for automatic slice selection that has a lot more intelligence than just rote policies. We're also very interested in not necessarily the traditional core network domain, but what we would call the ancillary domains of session management. And we're actually using AI today, deployed successfully, to do things like mitigate fraud in the call center, things like catching toll call pumping and other things where obviously there's, everyone's used to at least in the United States, is used to the horrific amount of spam calls that you get believe it or not, toll fraud and other types of fraud is rampant in the opposite direction into the call center. And again, that's a place where we're already applying AI.
Excellent. Thank you, Todd. Rajesh, could you present your line of work and how you're involved in AI, please?
Yeah, hello, Dimitris. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be on this esteemed panel. And it's a real pleasure to be partnering with you, Todd, Marco, and Sangees for this, what I consider a very important discussion on AI and networking. So first, quick introduction. So I lead architecture and systems engineering for Intel's networking business. I'm a vice president and CTO for the network platforms group at Intel. And as you know, Intel has been a pioneer in network virtualization. And over the last decade, we worked with the rest of the telco ecosystem to deliver the TCO benefits of standard high volume server platforms for network infrastructure. Now, I personally driven the vision of a standard server platform, such as Intel Xeon, as a best-in-class network applications platform. Now, as a result, we have seen a dramatic change in how networks are deployed. The hardware-software disaggregation has driven faster innovation cycles and opened up the ecosystem with many new entrants. The next phase of networking is all about cloud native transformation and adoption of cloud practices such as microservices as a deployment model and the continuous integration, continuous deployment for driving the cloud scale and faster innovation cycles. In spite of the pandemic, we have made great progress in 5G deployments in 2020, and we are seeing tremendous interest in edge computing and multi-edge, multi-cloud deployments. Now, as the complexity of infrastructure grows, we need to be able to deliver the performance, security, end-to-end quality of service for 5G network slices, and with virtualization and multi-tenancy in mind. So automation of network infrastructure is becoming a very critical requirement. The complexity of 5G networks and distributed computing at the edge do not allow us a static policy-based orchestration and management like we have done in the past. So rolling a truck with technicians every time you want to bring up a new service or every time you have a problem is simply inefficient and has a direct impact on business. So what's required is the ability to automate the network utilizing predictive AI-driven approaches that drive closed-loop behavior and make the network run like almost like an autonomous vehicle. So at Intel, we are focused on three key elements to drive this AI-driven closed-loop automation. First, it's the platform telemetry that covers metrics, logs, and events to create efficient data lakes. Second, it's about AI models and real-time inferencing on these data lakes for prediction. And third, it is the closed-loop automation by tying the real-time inferencing with orchestration, such as service orchestrators and resource orchestrators. We can go into more details on the use cases in later part of the discussion today.
Excellent. Thank you, Rajesh. Marco, please, if you could go next.
Absolutely. Marco Di Giacomo. Among the other hats that I wear, I lead the AI platforms for Verizon Consumer Group. And when we look at how AI is going to revolutionize our market as telecom operators, the reality is we think about it as addressing two components. One component is the core service that we provide, making us better, making us more efficient, making us, quite frankly, continue to meet the bar of quality that customers expect of us. The other is the front end. It's the ability that it gives us to take the wealth of data and the wealth of information that customers share with us to personalize the experiences that they have, experiences that are both when they choose to interact with us because there are specific activities that they're interested in proactively, and when we believe they have to interact with us because there's something that we're observing from an anomaly detection point of view that will enable us to serve them better. I would think that when we think about the first component, which is, if you want, how do we continue to provide our customers a core service that is as high quality as we need it, security is the other, if you want, pink elephant in the room, because we all know that as communication becomes more and more critical, it is becoming a chosen vector of attack from malignant entities, and AI is both a vehicle of attack and a vehicle of defense. When we think again about what we're going to be able to provide our customers, what AI allows us to do is to extend the white glove treatment that we can do through our humans to many, many more customers in a much more personalized way. And so again, when we think about AI, for us, it's a real revolution. It's a real revolution, both because of what allows us to do to continue to provide the services that we historically have offered our customers, and in terms of what it enables us to add on top of this, both in terms of increased quality and scale, and in terms of new capabilities that marry the 5G low latency, high bandwidth, and edge network, edge compute capabilities with the AI and with what AI means in terms of data collection, as in scaling of the data collection before it is transmitted back to the cloud.
Excellent. Thank you, Marco. And Cengiz, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cengiz. I am the Group Head of Big Data and AI in Vodafone Group in London. AI is revolutionizing the way we do business, obviously. So we have AI everywhere strategy in Vodafone. Essentially, we use AI in every aspect of decision making, be it marketing, CVM, customer value management, customer experience, or network optimization, customer operations, chatbots, retail optimization. So we are using basically all types of essential use cases like these. So telcos are rich, as you can imagine, when it comes to data, which allows us to capitalize on data richness and variety, and build certain AI solutions either to cut costs, generate new revenue streams, or improve our customer experience. So, for example, some of the top use cases we work on mostly are churn models, upsell, cross-sell models, retail footprint optimization, for example. That's very essential after the COVID, especially. Network investment optimization is also another one of the top use cases we worked on in the past. Credit risk prediction, customer experience improvement use cases are also on the rise. So, and also chatbots are some of the good use case families we worked on recently.
Very good. Thank you, Cengiz. So my next question was about use cases of AI in telecom networks, but I think the introduction that our panelists gave answers that question. So we've seen a lot on operations, on improving efficiency of the network. We've seen customer facing activities and so on. So we see the application of AI across a very broad set of use cases, right? So perhaps the next question I have, and perhaps targeted to Marco and Cengiz, is about the challenges of applying AI in the network, right? So, but I'm sure that many vendors will have solutions, and operators, they wish to improve their operations, but I'm also sure that there are a lot of challenges involved. So perhaps Marco, starting with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So listen, the telecommunication industry is unique in the fact that we come from a culture of privacy. For historical reasons, we've always been exceedingly regulated in some respects, and for very good reasons, if you ask me. And in the world of AI, we are, as you can imagine, extremely careful with making sure that not only we stay compliant with anything that is becoming mainstream regulation, but we proactively protect the privacy of our customers from players that ride on our networks. Because at the end of the day, customers rely on us to make sure that their information is kept private and secure. And so when you think about AI, for us, it's kind of a three-pronged opportunity and a three-pronged challenge. One component is, as I was sharing, making sure that we can use AI within the letter of the line, within the authorization that our customers give us, to make sure that we deliver for them value. And what this means is very often being able to segregate different type of data that we are authorized to use only for certain things, which, believe it or not, is relatively complicated in an ever-changing legislative environment. The second thing is making sure that we leverage this data differently when it comes to what are activities that are performed, again, in defense of the network versus when these are activities that are performed in service of our customers with reactive, for lack of a better term, scenarios. And third, where the customers give us authorization, because this is what I tell people is the biggest thing, making sure that we meet their expectations that are really being set by some of the experiences that AI has created, from search for Google to, quite frankly, everything that Amazon does, so that we show our capabilities to continue to be a part, not just with our industry, but with the ecosystem at large. And so again, if you think about the challenges on our side, they are first and foremost making sure that we make customers continue to feel that we respect their data and that we use it within the context that we've been authorized to use it within. And two, that we do so in a way that is meeting the expectations that are continuously reset as AI becomes more and more common.
Very important points. So Cengiz, would you agree?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. Actually, I would like to build on some of the points Marco raised already. I mean, permissions are extremely critical. I mean, we have millions of customers, and we on a constant basis, using their data to build these predictive models, AI solutions, these machine learning algorithms, etc. So increasing this, basically the permissions from our customers is one of the necessity. And you need to have the data first, given to us the permission by the customer. That's one of the priority. And also, you can even basically multiply, the points if you operate in multiple markets, for example, like Vodafone, right? I mean, in each market, we have different regulations in place. So we need to also overcome those challenges as well locally. I mean, for example, if you talk about, Vodafone, we operate in Germany, Spain, Italy, Turkey, South Africa. I mean, there are way too many countries with their own regulations. On top, there is this GDPR, obviously, set of different regulations. So overcoming all those challenges, building something that can be scalable across multiple markets, it is something, it's very difficult to do, to be honest, I should say. Yeah. This is the part of the organizational problem challenges we face. And also there are some other challenges as well. For example, I mean, data is the fuel of AI, right? I mean, unless you have high quality data, consistent data, variety of data about your customers, you cannot build an AI solutions. That's the fuel, that's the prerequisite, hygiene factor. Unless you have those quality data in a standardized way, if you operate in multiple markets, so you cannot unlock the potential of scalability, economies of scale, right? So that's also another challenge we face on a constant basis in Vodafone, I can say. What else I can say? And also, I guess we as the data science team play a very critical role, just between, right in the middle of the business, the commercial teams, and the technology teams, right? So it requires a certain different skills. You need to be able to understand the technological stack that is available to you, and also you need to be able to convert those technological stack into something that addresses a certain commercial problem. I mean, sometimes it is difficult to have or assemble a team of data scientists who have commercial mindset as well as the required technical skills. So that's also another challenge, finding the right talents, assembling those teams, attacking the right worthy commercial problem. Those are some of the daily challenges we encounter, I would say.
And I guess you also need management buy-in to invest in this area, right? Because what you're describing, Cengiz, I guess is a general AI platform that can be used across Vodafone's operations, right? And that requires buy-in and investment, both in time and money at the end of the day. So that's important as well.
Absolutely.
But perhaps the same question to Rajesh. I mean, where do you see challenges in the industry in terms of applying AI algorithms, and also what do your clients tell you, in this regard?
Yeah, so I think a lot of what Marco and Cengiz said resonated very well with me. But let me actually take a slightly technical perspective, right? So there is a fair bit of complexity in utilizing AI to seek efficiencies and solve problems today. There are multiple elements that need to be enabled in an efficient and effective manner. So, maybe it's best if we talk with a specific example. And I was referring to energy management earlier, which is the biggest operational expense for any telco operator. To automate energy management utilizing AI techniques, there are three key elements that have to come together meaningfully. First, you need platform telemetry, right? So events, logs, traces, and you need to be able to stream this telemetry data into structured data, such as data lakes. So this is where Intel is working with the open source communities such as CollectD, Prometheus, FluentD, Jaeger, and utilizing M3DB to create efficient and optimized data lakes. The second problem is you need machine learning models that are trained using historical time series data. And this might sound easy, but it's a difficult problem, right? Because you have lots and lots of data, and how do you actually take all the data and use that for training and creating, efficient models and perfect them over time with reinforcement learning kind of techniques. And you want to be able to utilize these trained models to derive real-time intelligence that can drive closed-loop behaviors. And third, you need to change some of the orchestration layers to be able to take input from AI models and be able to close the loops for automation. Now, fortunately, Kubernetes, as you know, with its modular and pluggable framework, gives us the right infrastructure to be able to drive this closed loop orchestration. And of course, although the open source projects help bring velocity and innovation, ultimately, we need a strong commercial software ecosystem that provides deployable and supported solutions. So this is where we've been actually working with ecosystem vendors as a part of our Intel Network Builders program to drive maturity in service assurance and automation solutions. So at a high level, I mean, those are sort of like some of the important things from a technical perspective that we've been pursuing at Intel, trying to drive like a faster innovation cycle in the open source community, but also actually balancing that and trying to promote a commercial ecosystem. So we have hardened, deployable, and supported solutions that can be brought to market to solve real problems.
Excellent. And Todd, from your perspective, from Oracle's point of view, what challenges are you helping? What challenges do your clients have, and how are you helping them?
So I think when you take a look at the telco transformations that have been going on, especially around the network, there's really a problem with skills gaps for the telcos. And it's important that the vendor community realizes this and really, steps up to help in that perspective. I think we've seen a lot of use cases thrown around. And, a data scientist is a very unique person in that he has to span a technical domain to understand what's going on, as well as the business domain. And what is the business domain for automating the network is very different than helping create a better customer experience at the CX or DX layer, which is a very different experience than if you're combating fraud or trying to work in those kinds of domains. And it's going to be really the vendor community's responsibility to step up and provide some of the core assets and capabilities, but it also has to be done in a framework where the data is king, and a model that is trained by synthetic data for the creation of an initial product isn't necessarily going to suffice when you actually deploy it. You're going to have to retrain the models, and you're going to have to work and fight against a serious problem known as model decay, where over time, as models change, as the data starts shifting, the features that you may have picked to actually train the model may start changing on you. And it's a continuous loop. And how that model is retrained, whether that's taken back into a larger training system in the public cloud, and how that's done with an anonymization of the data, and whether or not you have a governance system in place to ensure privacy, as well as the delivery. And finally, this all needs to be done in an open way. So I think Rajesh named off a lot of great programs in the CNCF, but the AI world goes even further around embracing openness. TensorFlow was a powerful tool, but we've seen the things like Onyx come in where the model formats can be standardized, but that doesn't necessarily always translate. You find that you sometimes have to rebuild models because the translations don't work. And so, there's even more of a need to take a look at, can things like GraphPipe, which is a program that Oracle supports in the open source community, help for the transmission of these models from the training facilities down to where the models get executed in a network or into a call center. So I think these are the kinds of things where you're seeing some vendors step up and are trying to help the operators get through these areas.
Right. Thank you, Todd. Now, before we jump to our next question, I'd like to invite our audience to use the Q&A tool in Zoom to ask any questions. So feel free to do so, and we'll be happy to take these as points of discussion. So in the meantime, perhaps let's jump to another topic, that of data, right? Because, like Cengiz and Marco said earlier, data is probably the most important aspect to train these AI models and to have for the inference models that AI produces to have meaning, right? And I guess telcos have a real advantage here in that they collect a lot of data. Obviously, we have to take privacy into account, but a challenge telcos may have is that this data is disparate, right, in different databases throughout the telco operation. And in multinational operators, it becomes even more complicated as there are many operators who may have different systems. So, Cengiz, I can see you're smiling there. So anything to share on this point?
Yeah, absolutely. Such a good point. So, I mean, it all comes down to data, as you just mentioned, and the variety of the data, consistency of the data, readily availability of the data. These are very critical things for us. And exactly as you said, I mean, when you start off, for example, your first data science team in any given telco, exactly as you said, the data sits on different silos, right? How can you bring all those, data sources together in a meaningful way so you can create your first feature store, let's say, and start building machine learning models on top, right? So, I mean, we of course, passed those stages in Vodafone, many years ago, thank God. So right now we are in a stage of basically do things at scale. That's another, big quantum leap for us to take, I guess I would say. So for example, exactly as you mentioned, different, countries, or we call them OPCO. So they have their own models running separately, independent of each other, because we have disparate data sets across markets, because they used to have different patchy systems, generating all those data sources. So the idea is that how can we make these data sources standardized in a way that so we can basically build once and deploy many in multiple geographies. So that's the next step we are about to take in a following couple of years. So I mean, that's a big step to take, to be honest. Exactly, I mean, for the obvious reason, right? So how can you standardize data in multiple markets so you can basically operate the way this big, giant digital companies operate, right? I mean, if you go to, I don't know, Uber, for example, if you go to Amazon or Google, some of the top digital companies, I don't think that they built one individual model for UK or Germany or Spain or Turkey or South Africa. Probably they just built one model once, in San Francisco. They deploy it many times across the world. So that's where we would like to go. So I mean, the first step is obviously standardizing data, and we took some concrete steps towards that direction. So that's the only thing I can say for now.
And Marco, would you agree as well?
Partially. I think the component that let me be a contrarian on is this, which is data eats models for lunch. Anybody who's done artificial intelligence understands that eventually it's what data you have that trumps the abilities of AI to be successful, as opposed to the original algorithm and the quality of the original algorithm, which is really, to your point, Dimitri, is what gives the telecommunication industry a big opportunity with AI. It's the richness of the data that we have. Now, as my esteemed colleague was pointing out, at Verizon, just like at Vodafone, just like I would argue, quite frankly, at every large company I've ever done this at, you don't become large very quickly. And what that means is that by the time that you're large, you have a lot of legacy systems, and those legacy systems typically create nice silos, data pools, et cetera, et cetera. And so a lot of the work that you end up having to do at the beginning is really, quite frankly, the hygiene and the data stitching that is needed. But if we project the world 10 years out, what I think we have to, first of all, keep in mind is that AI will be nothing else than another version of compute, network, and storage. It will be something that will be provided as part of the infrastructure for what are the common components of AI, that then every one of us will be able to, as different players in different industries, adapt to their specific needs by leveraging the data that we have. And there, the question to me becomes, rather than the personalization of AI and the development of the models, what is the type of data that will always be unique to you as a company versus what is the type of data that you will just buy on the open market? Because weather data, for example, for a telecommunication player is quite important. As you can imagine, storms kind of play on our ability to deliver sometimes. But I don't go and capture data on weather, and I don't even go and build weather models because there are other companies that can do it and that create those capabilities much more effectively than me. And so to me, when we think about both the opportunity and the challenge that we have, the first thing to keep in mind is that we need to distinguish the short term from the long term. In the long term, it's all about the data. And therefore, the winners are going to be the industries that have the most data, which is why I'm bullish about telco in general. The second thing is we need to distinguish what will make sense to keep proprietary versus what will be just off the shelf. And we all understand that every industry has a core competency, and that is where we will see proprietary AI be developed or enhanced, and capabilities that we just leverage from other industries. We don't build our own trucks at Verizon, we just buy them, right? Just like we don't generate our own electricity, we buy it. That will happen also for some capabilities in AI.
But also, I would say that the data, it is perhaps a disproportionate comparison with hyperscalers, right? Because if you see Facebook and Google, which are essentially advertising companies, they are trying to capture data for users that telcos already have, but do not use, right?
Well, there is a big difference there, which is consent. Everybody will be happy to give you their location if you are Google Maps, because they understand how you're going to use their location to help them navigate to some place. And so within that context, you have consent. As a carrier, I have location data and I'm authorized to use it to give you service for your cell phone. Without your explicit consent, I would breach your trust as a customer if I were to use that information for other purposes. And God help me if I were to use it, putting AI on top of it for other purposes. So I think what we have to acknowledge is the fact that consumers will eventually grow to trust certain companies and certain brands to offer them some capabilities, and that trust is going to be built on consent. What I think people are experiencing this day with some of the players that you mentioned, and that I will try not to mention again, is the fact that some of what happened didn't happen with explicit consent. Everybody understands that, hey, if you want to share a picture with some friends, you kind of need to make it available to the company that shares it with friends. But you didn't tell that company that they could go off and use facial recognition to then sell that data to a third party, or at least if you got that consent, it was buried on page 15 of a EULA, which very few people read. And I think this is what the regulators, this is what the public is expecting increasingly of everybody. And from our point of view as telcos, the mixed blessing is the fact that we've been highly regulated. So we have the infrastructure to deal with this sort of stuff, because we come from an environment in which, nope, there are things that I cannot do with your data, and therefore I learned to work around it. As in, I learned to provide you the service, and I learned to ask you for permission to.
And that's a big thing to consider here, because if you take a look at your example that you threw out, Dimitris, a lot of that in the other industries came from third-party data sources. Telcos have this unique ability in that they have a direct relationship with these consumers, and so that becomes first-party data. And you're actually seeing trends in the industry via either regulation or self-regulation of the industry itself, where third-party data is disappearing. And first-party data is going to be extremely important. but how you manage that first party data so that you no longer violate your customers' trusts is even more important. And so that means putting in data governance and a whole lot of other systems around the data. It's just not pulling the data in and getting it into a giant lake. It's understanding what you can do with each pieces of those data, and that is governed by a pipeline that has, you know, very strict governance rules and processes and code put around it.
Indeed, fully agree there. But perhaps let's make a parenthesis here and ask Rajesh, you know, that obviously works for Intel. So this vast amount of data, right? So is there perhaps a processing challenge here, right? So, you know, are telcos capable of crunching all this data and using AI algorithms, or will there be a significant increase in terms of processing requirements?
Yeah, so that's an awesome question. And I think the geo-distributed nature of data is a reality. And what I'm actually excited about is the discussion around distributed computing and the ability to do a lot of computing at the edge. And I truly think that this is where the telcos have a real opportunity, because unlike the hyperscalers, telcos actually have a much more closer presence to the consumer. So you have, you know, the various locations at near and far edge, including central offices. And more recently, I think there's been a transformation of central offices towards making them more data center. I think NFV has aided that. I think as we go to cloud native deployment models, I think just the power of distributed computing at the edge and the multi-cloud becoming a reality, combined with the virtues of cloud native computing. So the ability to disaggregate the application into microservices and being able to deploy these microservices anywhere in the infrastructure, I think can be a very powerful paradigm. And I know telcos are a little bit late to this, because I think the hyperscalers actually pioneered a lot of, like, you know, what we refer to as cloud native today. But I think the real opportunity is how do we actually utilize some of those same techniques that you've seen hyperscalers pioneer to drive what I almost think of as sort of like, the epicenter of new innovation at the edge, right? And so the ability to solve like many of the problems that Todd and Marcus and Chingiz spoke about around the data sovereignty and security, I think you can solve a lot of those problems without necessarily having to create this big data lakes, centralized data lakes, but doing a lot of like localized processing, which by the way becomes very important when you're dealing with the video and you're trying to apply analytics on real-time traffics, because these are latency sensitive and you want to be able to bring the cloud to where the application is and where the data is. And that's why the significance of edge location. And at the same time, the ability to disaggregate and place microservices. So if I need to do a billing application or something that's not latency sensitive, I can locate it in my telco clouds or even in a hyperscaler data center and still be able to stitch all of that together to deliver an end-to-end service with the necessary quality of service. So what excites me is that we are, I think, at the right time of the compute and communications sort of like coming together, and the ability to sort of like do this distributed computing using cloud native practices. I think we have a wonderful opportunity, and I'm really excited as I look forward to the next few years.
Indeed. But one challenge perhaps that telcos may face is that this distribution of payloads will create a bigger demand to automate, the operation of this distributed network, right? Because it's impossible to manage, all these microservices and enterprise use cases, using today's tools, right? So further
I think, Dimitri, if I can build on what Rajesh was sharing, the thing that is exciting to us is very simple. If you think about the math today, you capture 1,000, you store 100, you transmit 10, you analyze 1.
Right.
And that's the ratio because, capturing it is becoming increasingly common. Storing it is not as expensive as it used to be. Transmitting it is still a problem because Moore's law doesn't apply to the laws of physics, only to the laws of compute. And then again, everything that we're doing from a cloud compute point of view is really helping us become faster and better at analyzing that 10 that now is in the cloud. But what AI does for us as telecom operators is we have the edge. And what the edge allows us to do is to pre-process a number of things so that as opposed to storing 100, I can actually go down to just storing the 10 that I know I will want to do the analysis on. I go from capturing everything and analyzing everything centrally to pre-processing and screening out the majority of the data that is noise as opposed to information. Mm-hmm. That is a capability that we have that, if you ask me, is generated by a simple asset, electricity. Because the only other thing that has that power is your cell phone, because that's the only other thing that is with you and that has at the edge the ability to capture, store, and process. But differently from a cell phone tower, a cell phone operates on battery, which means by definition that its ability to continuously perform AI activities is going to be limited by the fact that eventually it's going to impact your ability to use it for its primary service. And so if you think about a world of IoT, the advantage that we have, especially with 5G, is that the latency reduction that 5G is introducing enables scenarios that before you just couldn't do because of, again, the gap that would exist between the signal generation at the sensor and the processing at the cell phone tower. The ability that you have to ingrain AI at the periphery of your network allows you to pre-process and identify which one of the signals for your sensors are meaningful and should be reported back to the cloud for further analysis versus to just be filtered out because they're standard reading. They're, everything is fine and nothing is really happening. And these are all scenarios that, again, for us have the very practical, if you want, competitive advantage of being grounded into something as, if you want, prosaic as the fact that we have electricity.
Right. The common denominator, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Indeed. So I think we're coming up to quarter minutes to the top of the hour, and we'll probably wrap up our panel soon. But perhaps a final point of discussion is about industry activities. So I'd like to ask our panelists, whether you see any consortia or something that's missing, perhaps open source being as an interesting tool to continue this discussion further, or do you expect that operators will work with vendors to implement their own systems? Perhaps starting with Cengiz.
Maybe I can answer the industry alliance parts. Again, it all boils down to, data and its variety. So I'm also coming from a financial industry myself and now working in the telco industry. I would say that it could be a powerful alliance between these two sectors, Yet, of course, there are certain limitations of GDPR and privacy, obviously. And also another collaboration area could be between, telcos and over to top companies like OTTs. Because at the end of the day, we are providing the, infrastructure, right? But they are making the big bucks revenues from the service we are providing with their apps like Uber. You can think of many, right? So, I see a huge, collusion at some point. Right now, there's also a collusion, and also telcos are not quite happy with the amount of money being generated on the network they provide by making tons of investment, whereas some other people just getting, collecting the apples and oranges from the tree, right? So probably in the future, telcos will be more active in terms of creating new services and try to compete against, these OTTs. Or at some point, they should find or strike a, some middle point between the two, and also, at some point, telcos should get a percentage of the overall value generated on their network. So I guess.
We can only hope. What about you, Marco? What do you think?
Listen, first of all, I'm a big believer in free markets. And again, in my side, we will harvest what we sow as an industry. I believe the fundamental thing that we all should ask ourselves as humans is what is going to guide the ethics of AI? Because that is something that should be set if you ask me, at either a government, if not global level. Because the reality is we all know that the pressure of profitability will inevitably drive bad behaviors in different parts of the market. And those bad behaviors, if not checked early, will become prevalent in the industry to the detriment of all of us, not just in the telecommunication industry. And so from my side, the hope that I have is that just like when the telecommunication industry was created, there was a realization that this was so powerful that needed to have its own special sets of regulations. And those regulations were made clear upfront and enforceable. The same thing will happen with AI. Again, this is quite frankly my perspective as a human being, even before as an employee of one of the biggest telecommunication players out there. Once those rules are set, that will allow everybody to excel in a way that will be ethical and that will be sustainable for all of us, because none of us, quite frankly, wants to end up on the front page of major newspapers with some of the stories that some players have already ended up on. And, you know, I certainly understand the pressure on their side to deliver certain results that led to the decisions that ended them on the front pages of.
Excellent. So yes, I would certainly agree. So ethical AI and perhaps regulation for this space is a hot topic of discussion. And certainly you could say that, you know, regulation in telecoms is not perhaps similar to the lack of regulation, hyperscalers, especially in terms of data sovereignty and data and privacy. But in any case, I'm afraid we've run out of time here. I think we could have easily gone, you know, over with our discussion for hours, you know, for many more hours. But in any case, I would like to thank all of our attendees for spending some time with us. And of course, a huge thanks to our panelists for the very good discussion. We will follow up with an email containing the recording. And in the meantime, if there are any questions still, please let us know. I see we have a couple of questions that we didn't have time for, unfortunately, and we will answer those. And in the meantime, I wish everyone good health and thank you very much.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Dimitris, thanks for hosting us. This was good discussion.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Likewise.
Thank you. It
Thank
was
you
our
very much,
pleasure.
Dimitris.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.